He is already gone. The water does not know this yet. 906 feet beneath the surface of a sun-warmed Mexican sinkhole, a man's dive computer ticks against his wrist, its screen registering a depth that no cave diver in history had ever reached and survived long enough to describe. Above him, the sun is cheerful. The grass floats. 3 women in full technical dive gear stand at the cenote's edge, watching 2 sets of bubbles rise from a depth they cannot imagine. And at minute 18, support diver Ann Kristovich notices something that hollows her stomach like a cold fist. 1 set of bubbles has stopped. She locks eyes with Karen Hole, Jim Bowden's wife, across the water. No words. Words would make it real, and neither woman is ready for what real means when the man below is 900 feet down in a sinkhole no human has ever reached the bottom of, with a dive computer still ticking and no way to call for help. He was not just the best diver alive. He was the man who wrote the rules that kept every other diver alive. And now, 900 feet below his own rulebook, nothing could save him. In the next few minutes, this video will show you the final data log from Sheck's wrist computer. A 3-digit number that proves he wasn't just fighting the water. He was losing a war inside his own nervous system, and he knew it. And what he did next, alone in that dark, is the most extraordinary act of engineering this sport has ever witnessed. Sheck Exley did not look like a legend. He looked like a math teacher, because that is exactly what he was. A mathematics instructor at Suwannee High School in Live Oak, Florida, who spent every weekend, every holiday, every dollar he earned descending into the permanent dark of America's underwater cave systems, rewriting what was physically possible and getting home in time to grade papers. By 1994, he had made over 4,000 cave dives. Not one ended in decompression sickness. He was the first technical diver in history to descend below 800 feet, a depth so physiologically extreme that fewer than 20 people had ever attempted it, and most who did were dead before they could describe what they found. He did not just survive it, he documented it, analyzed it, and dived again. At 130 feet, nitrogen in standard compressed air begins narcotizing the brain, a spreading drunk that strips judgment and spatial awareness like paint from wet wood. Most divers switch to helium-oxygen mixes to avoid it, but at depths beyond 600 feet, a different terror activates. High-pressure nervous syndrome, HPNS. The nervous system itself misfires. Think of it as 30 atmospheres of pressure, 30 times the pressure inside a car tire, applied to every nerve fiber in your body simultaneously. The result, tremors, visual hallucinations, seizures. The brain was not built for this. No brain was. At 900 feet, the water weighs on a diver like a 747 aircraft stacked on their chest, and it presses from every direction at once. Sheck Exley had survived HPNS before. He had felt the tremors, ascended, recovered. That survival was not proof the abyss had accepted him. It was proof that the abyss, on those occasions, had decided to let him go. And Exley, mathematician that he was, had calculated that the probability would hold. He was wrong about one variable, the most important one. 2 days before the dive, they staged the operation. 20 decompression tanks, each anchored at a precisely calculated depth inside the sinkhole. This was not recklessness. It was the most architecturally complex deep dive plan ever assembled. 2 independent descent lines, gas mixtures calibrated to exact partial pressures at target depth. Decompression schedules so granular they ran across multiple handwritten tables, built by the mind of a man who taught quadratic equations to teenagers on Monday mornings. But one number could not be controlled. The bottom of El Zacaton waited at 1,112 feet. No diver had ever reached it. The depth had only been confirmed by a plumb line the year before, the weighted cord spinning off the reel, past 500 feet, past 800, past 1,000, finally stopping after 1,080 feet of line had unspooled into the dark. The divers stared at each other in silence. The sinkhole was not a swimming hole. It was a geological throat. He wasn't just diving a sinkhole. He was threading a needle 9 football fields underground in total darkness, with his life measured in cubic centimeters of breathing gas, and a plan that assumed his body would perform exactly as the textbook predicted. Mary Ellen Eckhoff, his ex-wife, his most trusted dive partner, watched him that evening. She would later say he seemed ready. What that word carried, unsaid, was this: a man who is prepared for everything looks exactly the same as a man who has already made his peace with not coming back. They do not swim down, they fall. With this much gas weight on their bodies, technical divers descend like a controlled collapse, monitoring the rate, reading 10 instruments simultaneously, while the body is compressed by a force that increases by 1 full atmosphere for every 33 feet of descent. The math does not pause. The depth gauge does not pause. Nothing pauses. At 130 feet, the narcosis begins. For most divers, this is the hard ceiling. For Exley, it is background noise. His neurological resistance to narcosis was so documented in diving literature, it was described as anomalous, a quirk of brain chemistry that allowed him to function clearly at depths where trained professionals had removed their own regulators, genuinely convinced they were breathing air in a sunlit garden. He passes 300 feet, then 500. His previous dives in this exact cenote to 721 feet had been textbook. No complications, no physiological flags. Gas burning exactly as calculated. The descent line runs taut beneath him, a black spine into the center of the earth. And for a long stretch of this dive, the plan is simply working. At 900 feet, the pressure is 28 atmospheres, 28 times the force pressing on you at the surface. Every square inch of skin absorbs 420 pounds of force. That is the weight of a professional linebacker sitting on a postage stamp. Multiply that across your entire body. Now consider the air itself. At this depth, gas density increases so dramatically that you are no longer breathing air. You are breathing a fluid with the viscosity of heavy cream. Every single breath requires your respiratory muscles to bench press the column of gas in the hose. And the helium-oxygen mixture Exley carried, Heliair 6, calibrated precisely for this pressure window, is performing exactly as calculated. Which means, if anything goes wrong, it is not the equipment that has failed. It is something the equations never accounted for. At 800 feet, the wall of the cenote levels slightly. His torch beam catches something below. Open water descending. The 1,000-foot mark, a threshold no cave diver has ever reached, is within the reach of his light for the first time in the history of this sport. For one heartbeat in the permanent dark, Sheck Exley, math teacher, rule writer, 4,000 dive veteran, is the absolute sovereign of the deepest place a living human has ever stood. For one heartbeat. Then his right hand begins to shake, fine at first, almost imperceptible. But Sheck Exley is a man who measures everything, and he measures this. The tremor is HPNS. He has felt it before, at 879 feet, in a test dive the prior year. It resolved on ascent. The data said it was survivable. The data, right now, at 850 feet, is making a case that his body refuses to confirm, because the tremor does not resolve. The tremor deepens. His nervous system is conducting 100 billion simultaneous misfires, and his brain, flooded with signals it was never designed to interpret, begins generating experiences with no external source. Heat sensations, peripheral flashes, a creeping absolute certainty that the body is no longer entirely under the mind's command. Jim Bowden, 19 feet away on his own line, is also in trouble. His gas is burning faster than predicted. At 925 feet, a depth that shatters every previous record for this category of dive, Bowden makes the decision that will allow him to surface 9 grueling hours later. He turns. He begins the ascent. He does not know that Sheck Exley, 19 feet away, will not make the same decision. He will not know this until he breaks the surface, gasping, and sees Exley's decompression tanks, all of them, still hanging untouched at their assigned depths, still full. still waiting for a man who is not coming. Here is the cruelest number in this entire story. Bowden survived at 925 feet. Exley died at 906 feet, 19 feet shallower. The abyss does not grade on a curve. 18 minutes into the dive, Kristovich sees it. She is a support diver, trained to observe without emotion, to respond without hesitation. And the thing she observes, with no ambiguity and no possible alternative interpretation, is that one set of bubbles has stopped rising. Something inside her goes very cold, not temperature cold, the specific cold of a trained professional whose pattern recognition has delivered, silently and without mercy, a single word: gone. She exchanges a glance with Karen Hola. No words cross between them. Kristovich descends to 270 feet, the absolute limit for a support diver, and finds, tumbling upward through the dark water with nowhere to go, Sheck Exley's laminated dive tables. The map. His map. Rising upward without him. The dive tables were the map. The map was floating upward. The man who made the map was not. Below Kristovich, unreachable, Sheck Exley is making a decision. We cannot watch it. We have only the evidence, recovered 3 days later when the team hauled the descent line from the water. And that evidence speaks in the language of a man who understood, in the dark, at 906 feet, exactly what was happening to his nervous system. Understood that it could not be reversed, and made one final, deliberate, extraordinary choice. He wrapped the descent line around his own tanks. Not once, deliberately. The post-dive analysis was unambiguous. The entanglement could not have been accidental. Not from a convulsion, not from HPNS tremors. The geometry was wrong for chance. It was purposeful. Sheck Exley, in his final moments of conscious clarity, tethered himself to the line so that his body could be retrieved without anyone risking their life to find him. He had spent 29 years writing the rules that kept other divers alive. He spent his last minutes enforcing them, one final act of protection, one final act of teaching. At the bottom of the world, with no audience and no possibility of rescue, alone in the dark, doing the math. HPNS does not simply seize the mind. Physiologists describe a phenomenon called paradoxical clarity, a brief window, seconds to minutes, where the sufferer experiences sharp, lucid cognition immediately before neurological collapse. If Exley experienced this, it explains what the evidence suggests. A man who, in his clearest final moment, performed a precise act of structural engineering. No panic, no thrashing, the line wrapped, the body secured, the problem solved. This is who Sheck Exley was. Even when dying, he was still doing the math. For 3 days, the team does not leave Zacaton. Mary Ellen Eckhoff dives into the sinkhole herself. She searches the upper column, finding nothing but the cenote's silence and its limestone walls, and the staged decompression bottles that now serve no purpose except to mark the geometry of an absence. She dives. She returns. She dives again. On the 3rd day, they haul the descent line from the water. It comes up slowly, hand over hand, and then, exactly as he had planned, exactly as he had arranged, in his final conscious minutes at 906 feet, Sheck Exley surfaces for the last time. His wrist computer reads 906 feet. His tanks are nearly empty. His face, by all accounts, is at rest in the particular way of a man who, at the very end, was completely in control of the one thing still within his power to control. At the 12-minute mark, here is what we promised you. Sheck Exley's wrist computer, recovered from his body on day 3, showed a maximum log depth of 906 feet, 3 digits. That is the entire record of his final dive. Not a report, not a testimony, a number, the last thing his equipment said before the silence. Every cave diver alive today carries Sheck Exley's work on their body. The octopus regulator, the redundant second stage clipped to every BCD, he invented it. The rule of thirds for gas management, the methodical line protocol, the written safety standards that transformed cave diving from a sport that killed people at catastrophic rates into something approaching a discipline. These are his. He did not write them as theory. He wrote them by surviving situations where the theory failed, by watching friends die when the protocols didn't exist yet, by building, from grief and data and 4,000 dives, a structure that would outlast him. His book was called Basic Cave Diving, A Blueprint for Survival. Read that title now. Notice what it costs you to read it. He did not die because he was reckless. He did not die because he was arrogant. He died because he was the only human being qualified to attempt what he attempted. And sometimes being the most qualified person alive is exactly what puts you closest to the edge of what surviving means.